Hello, we are live. Today it's Wednesday. I came on last Wednesday and mentioned I would be coming live every Wednesday to kind of talk to you about communication and conflict and how to achieve that happy, peaceful life. So I'm just going to make sure that I've got everything up here on Facebook. Last time I couldn't actually get the comments.
Talk to you about communication and conflict and how to achieve that happy.
Stop.
And how to achieve that happy, peaceful life. So I'm just going to make sure that I've got everything up here on Facebook. Last time.
Okay, let's just mute that. Sorry. Technology, just learning. I want to make sure I get your comments this week because last week I missed them all and I saw them afterwards, and that's not good. That's not what we want. So if you're joining me here, today we're talking about habits. Let me just show you what we're talking about today. We are going to be talking about, do habits make relationships happier? What is the benefit of habits? What are habits? That's what we're going to be talking about today. So if you're watching me live, I am streaming through YouTube and Twitter and my Facebook page. So if you're watching me from my Facebook page, you know that, and YouTube, you know that a lot of what I do is nursing focused and centric. I do a lot of videos on skills or pathophysiology and pharmacology, but I also focus on the human side, which is that connection and the communication, because I know there's a lot of conflict and tension in the workplace. With that, if you're following me on YouTube, welcome and say hello. I would love to get your, oh, there's a comment already. Hey, Abdul, thanks for popping in and saying hi. Let me know where you're watching from. Oh, it tells me YouTube. Awesome. Glad you're here. So this episode today is going to focus on habits. Now, if you're watching me on Twitter, you probably don't really know too much. I don't post there very often, but I'm starting to expand my Twitter horizon. Okay, so make sure you're popping in and saying hello. If you're watching from Facebook, you do have to give permission for StreamYard to allow your comments to come through. If you don't, that's why I've got you up here on my phone so I can try and capture those comments as well. So welcome. Today's Wednesday, October. Actually, I don't even know what day it is. If you recall from last week, I said I would have to be a little late today because I was getting my hair cut. Have to look good for the video. So I wanted to start by talking about mom's bread. Hey, Arslan, nice to see you here, popping you up here. Hey, there we go. So nice. Let me know where you're watching from. I always like to see how far reaching these videos go. It's always amazing as to who tunes in, like where you're watching from. So I appreciate knowing that. If you have any questions, comments, make sure you pop them in there and we'll get them addressed, okay? But I want to just tell you a little story about mom's bread because as I was preparing for this presentation or this talk about habits and what they are, I realized just how pervasive they are in our everyday life. And in fact, just lived one about an hour ago, and I'll try to come back to that at the end of this because it's really quite amazing how when you bring your awareness to habits, how you're able to recognize and identify whether they're helpful or not helpful. Do they add value or do they not add value? So when it comes to mom's bread, growing up, and maybe you have a story like this too. So if you do, share it with me in the comments. I'd love to hear your favorite memory almost from childhood. But within there are embedded little habits that we do. We often call them traditions or things like that. But if you go deeper and you really break down a few things, you'll find that there's habits that were contributing to your happiness or taking away from your happiness. So every Saturday, I'm going to say it's Saturday because I actually don't remember what day of the week it was, because really as a kid, time had no relevance. But on weekends, I would recall my mom would be in the kitchen and she would start early in the morning and she would start mixing up the flour and the sugar and the water and the yeast, and she would be making bread. And that was always a good day because when the bread was finally ready, there was something in it for us. But we weren't really too concerned when she was in the kitchen mixing all that stuff up and kneading the bread and shaping the bread and letting it rise, punching it down, letting it rise. Back then we didn't have quick rise yeast, so it always had to rise twice. And it would feel like an eternity before those buns were actually put into the oven. Now, once they were in the oven and you could start to smell the bread in the kitchen, which is so glorious if you've ever had that, that's when our habits would kick in. And I didn't really realize they were habits until I was starting to prepare for this. And we would then quickly run to the kitchen because you could smell the bread. You knew it was just about time for these delicious warm buns to come out of the oven. So we would rush to the kitchen And we would get our little saucers out. We'd select our seat. There were 5 kids. And so sometimes getting a seat at the table was hard. We would get our seat and we would have our buttered knives in hand, just waiting for that goodness to come out of the oven. And once it was ready, oh my God, we just gobbled that stuff up. I mean, the butter would be dripping off those buns. It'd be running down your hand. You'd be licking it off. And it was just such a joyful memory. And that's such a warm memory for me. And what I realized is creating traditions in my family. I also make bread. And that's one of my favorite things too, is when the boys come into the house and they go, oh, you made bread. But for them, their first thought isn't, where's the buttered knife? Although they do get one. Trust me, they get one right away. Their first thought is, are we having stew? And so they've associated bread with homemade stew and a really great meal that we're going to have that day. Now the habits, I'm going to break that habit down for you as we go through just exactly what a habit is. So let's do that next. What are habits? Now you might be thinking, well, how's that even a habit? Eating bread from the oven. When I share with you the characteristics and what habits are and how they benefit us or take away value, then that might start to make a little bit more sense. So in fact, habits are those unconscious acts or thoughts or beliefs that we have that influence the next action. And so think about, if you were to, let me take a step back. They're really like automated. They help us in so many ways, but they start out as a conscious thought where you have to put effort into it and think about it and practice that. And then it becomes so ingrained in you that we don't think about it anymore, much like tying your shoes. If you can think of the time when you had to really concentrate on making that first loop, sticking your tongue out, making the next loop, and which one goes over, which one goes under, and all that concentrated effort that went into learning how to tie your shoes. Those are now largely unconscious acts. And habits are really just ways of automating a lot of those things that we do in life. And there's some really good reasons for that. But we have a lot of habits. And just think of your sleep and wake cycle, for example. A lot of people habitually go to bed at a particular time in the day. And even before that, they have a habitual routine to get them ready for bed. Same thing in the morning when they wake. They have a habitual routine of when do they shower, when do they eat, what do they pick out to wear. They have patterns of behaviors that have taken these largely conscious activities and made them unconscious so we can focus our attention somewhere else. It's like, why don't we have tuna for breakfast? That just sounds kind of gross, right? And so habits are really helpful for a lot of reasons, but some are so much easier to recognize than others. And in fact, it's when you put conscious effort into it, you start to peel back the habits, and then you can identify if they're helping your relationship or hindering your relationship. And as I have worked on this presentation, I have uncovered both. Like when you prepare to teach something and it works through your life again, it works through your life in many different ways. And every day I have had new illumination about, oh, that's a habit that was really helpful. And oh, that's one that's not so helpful. And that's where I need to be looking and focusing my efforts to move forward. So what habits are you passing on in your life when you think of those warm memories, and how does that increase your happiness today in your relationships? And which ones are not increasing your happiness? So the benefits of habits, I kind of alluded to it already, in that when those largely conscious acts where we've really had to put a lot of dedicated time and energy into this task or this learning becomes unconscious, it frees our mind up so that we can then pay attention to the next thing that we need to learn. If we could never master tying shoes, we would never have mastered zipping up our jacket. We would have never have mastered putting on our mittens. Like there's so many things that we have to learn in life in order to advance and survive, that habits really shorten that timeline by building stepping stones for us. So just imagine if it were to take you still 5 minutes every day to tie that shoe, how exhausted would you be by the time you got to work? Because it's not just the shoe. Take a step back and you think about, which tap do I turn for the hot water? How do I get the shower to run and not the tub? And all those little micro steps that you take in between to get to the car. And then if you recall when you learned how to drive, how much focus, energy was in that and how exhausted you were by the end of it, you would be tired, wiped out, and nothing else would happen for the day. In fact, we take a nap, and that's a good habit sometimes. Okay. So aside from habits freeing up our mind to learn the next most challenging thing or to critically think about something that's come into our awareness, habits also improve our accuracy because they are practiced things, right? So you don't just get right into it. You spend time looking at it, mastering it, practicing it, and then it becomes automatic, which makes our accuracy a little bit better. On the flip side, that accuracy, the automation of things sometimes can lead to mistakes, and that's a topic for another day. It's one of the things we see in medical errors, for example, is that automaticity of behaviors, and we take away our conscious thought when it needs to be. But our own successes in life, how we see ourselves, how we feel about ourselves, how we interact with others, is largely dependent upon the habits that we take. You think of all the things that you do in the morning to get ready, whether that is your hair, your makeup, you pick out your clothes, the route that you take, the people that you say hi to, all of those things are habits in some way to set you up for success. If you wake up and your habit is to be grumpy and pessimistic, and all you can do is find fault in the world before you even leave the door, well, just think about how those habits are taking away value from your life. So let's look at the 3 characteristics of habits. The first one, if we go back to the bread story, or even back to your morning routine story, is there are cues, or triggers we call them, that initiate a response and initiate a set of behaviors to achieve a particular outcome. That's kind of a summary of what we're going to talk about. So the first thing is a trigger. What is the trigger that caused me to run to the table and get my buttered knife all ready? It was the smell of the bread cooking in the air. And that triggered an automatic response. I didn't really think about it. I just went to the kitchen, grabbed my little seat at the table, buttered knife in hand, waiting. And that would be the routine part of it. So the trigger was the smell of the bread. The routine was running to the table, getting out my saucer, selecting my seat, staring into the oven, waiting for those delicious treats to brown up. So that's the second characteristic of a habit, is that there's a routine that follows after the trigger or the cue. Now, the third characteristic is there's a reward. There's something that you're getting out of this. And we typically think of reward as a positive thing. But even in our bad habits, which I will talk about tomorrow in our private Facebook group, so if you haven't already joined that, Relationships in Conflict, I'll just put that up here for you. Relationships in Conflict in the Facebook group. We'll be talking tomorrow more about how bad habits might be the cause of your unhappiness. But even in our bad habits, there is a reward that our brain perceives. It might be safety. If you think of conflict and the tensions in your relationship, and maybe somebody comes in the door and they say something you don't like, what is your habitual routine response? Because there's the cue. How do you respond, and what's the reward? If you respond in kind and you yell back at them, the reward for you might be preservation of ego or pride or values. But you perceive a reward, and that's why you follow the set of behaviors. So the 3 steps, and I think I covered them all. I just want to make sure I say them again. A cue, trigger. And when you start to put your conscious mind to looking for these, you're going to find that habits are just popping up all over the place for you. That's what I have been experiencing this last week is, wow, I had no idea how habitual I am when I show up in conflict. And I'm going to share that story in a moment. Cue, trigger, what is the stimulus? Second thing is, what are those routine behaviors that I adopt? What are those routine thoughts? What are those feelings? They tend to be habitual, largely unconscious. And we want to bring our attention to those to see what we can capitalize on the good ones and what we can remedy for the other ones. And then the third thing is reward. The 3 characteristics. So here's the question we need to ask ourselves are our habits adding value? And the only way we're going to know that is if we bring conscious thought to what we do on a daily basis. So if I were to, I will share, just an hour ago, I went through this situation, and as I was going through it, I was able to diffuse my emotional reaction, not immediately, because it takes time to build presence of mind to identifying the trigger, identifying that routine behavior, and connecting it to the reward in order for you to undo and go backwards to change the dynamic of that conflict. And so what happened is my husband and I had a little tiff, as you know what happens sometimes. He had something he needed to be done. I had something I needed to do. And they were competing priorities in the same space. In navigating the boundaries of our relationship, that's something I talk about with the people in my programming. I realized quickly that there wasn't going to be a collaboration. His needs for him were so urgent in that moment that he was incapable of connecting and identifying how we could collaborate. And so here's my cue. My trigger was, he's upset. And my routine behavior was, let's just push aside my stuff. We'll take care of your stuff and I'll deal with my stuff later. Typically, the reward would be that I feel justified in being angry. But what's so magical when you start to bring your attention to this stuff is as we are transitioning through the actions that we need to do, the routine that we need to do, I was able to halt it. And I was able to say, whoa, I actually don't want to feel like I'm justified for being angry. That's not going to serve this relationship. I do want to have a conversation. This is not the right time because we both had a little bit of energy involved. But I was able to stop typically I'd be like continuing to interject and try to figure things out and try to push him to see what he did. But that would not serve any greater good. So the habit I became aware of it because I recognized the cue. And this is what happens when you start to bring attention. Sorry, I'm like leaning forward because I'm so excited to share it with you. It is so empowering when you can recognize the things that are doing good forces, the good forces in your life and the bad forces in your life. And then you can interject and start to change and rewire your brain as to, no, that's an old reward. And in fact, it doesn't even feel good. So we're just going to squash that right now. All right, I'm just going to check the comments here. Oh, Arslan, you're from Asia. That's so cool. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to check my Facebook here, see if there's anything there. No comments. If you have any questions, put them in there. Let me know how habits are working in your life, or maybe this video is going to trigger you to start thinking about your habits and how you show up in conflict. And are they adding value is the question. Okay. So if you'd like to learn more about this, there's a few things you can do. One is join our Facebook group. It's called Relationships in Conflict. It's on the bottom of your screen. I'll be doing live teachings in there on Thursdays. Tomorrow is at noon. I think it's at noon. I had to change the time in that group too because I had another competing priority. You can also go to connectwithconfidence.me. That's on the screen as well. And in there, you're going to find there's a free download. And this free download is called Becoming the Leader in Your Life. And it's talking about specifically dealing with bad days and bullies. And that's because in these moments where there's tension, we want to just immediately go to, they're such a bully, because it doesn't feel like they're considering our needs, wants, desires. But it's not always a bully situation. Sometimes it's just a bad day, and it's about, how do I address this? How do I show up? How can I open up a conversation to reduce the tension in my life? So being the leader in your life has nothing to do with position. It has everything to do with engagement and collaborating so that you can reduce the tension and continue to navigate that relationship in a positive way as opposed to a negative way. And habits is actually one of those things that when I talk with clients tends to be a pretty dominant issue, in that, as I just explained a few moments ago, the trigger was there was a competing priority, no collaboration. So the defense mode comes in. This is that routine after the cue that I need to fight for what I think is right. And then the reward was I get to be justified in being angry. That is not going to serve any relationship. And so if you get some of that information, that free download at connectwithconfidence.me, it will give you some quick start tools that you can start to implement right now to reduce the tension and start to recognize your habits, because your habits would be either a defensive response or a withdrawal response, or just ignore it and pretend it didn't happen, which then leads you down this path of routine behaviors of feeling bad for yourself, feeling frustrated, you're struggling, why stay here, which leads to the reward of, I guess that's just supposed to be this way. I'm not worthy, right? So you want to find those justifications. That's not what we want. That is not what we want for you. So you head on over there, get that free download. There's some quick wins in there for you, as well as a 3-step process to get started. Because I don't want you to be without anything, okay? Okay, what else do I want to tell you about? Oh yeah, join me here every Wednesday. We're going to do lives at noon. That is the plan for next week. It will be posted ahead of time. The theme for the lives will always be related to connecting in confidence with somebody in your life that you are struggling with. Whether this is a friend, a family member, a colleague, a boss, we have solved a lot of those problems with other clients, and we can certainly help you too. So hang out. Join me every Wednesdays at noon. Let's see. Talk more about habits in conflict and give you some mind work to do. Oh, that's tomorrow. Tomorrow I have some mind work for you to do. Today, what I'm hoping you're going to do is start to recognize that there is power in putting conscious thought to the unconscious. There is energy in uncovering those routines and those rewards so that you can maximize the good ones, and you can start to duplicate those patterns in other areas, and you can minimize the effect of the negative ones, and you can start to rewire how you do respond so that you can reduce the risk of further conflict. That is my hope for you. That is my whole purpose of coming on here, is to share this information with you. So thank you for watching, whether that's YouTube or Twitter or Facebook. I appreciate that you have hung out with me here. Again, if you're on YouTube, you know that the Nurse Minder Station focuses largely on nursing-centric theory and skills, but it also touches on that interpersonal relationship between other nurses, patients, families, colleagues. A lot of places, an opportunity there for growth. If you're watching on Twitter, welcome. This is a brand new interactive piece for me so that we can connect, and I'll be watching for your comments a little bit later. And if you're watching on Facebook, you've been here for a long time with me, so I appreciate you sticking in with me today. That's it for today. We'll see you next Wednesday, and just have a great day. Make it a great day. Like, that's what we always do, right? Make it a great day.